Two young fish are swimming along, having a what seems like fairly normal day. And all of a sudden, on their travel, they pass an older fish who looks at the two young fish and says, "What's up, boys? How's the water?" And keeps on swimming by. The fish think nothing of it. They continue down their path until one of those fish looks at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" Now, this is the parable that David Foster Wallace starts his commencement speech at Kenyon College all the way back in 2005 with. And this is the most impactful commencement speech I have ever listened to. This is going to be a little bit of a different, timeless reflection today because this isn't necessarily a podcast. It's a speech, but I cannot recommend it enough. I almost want to tell you to stop recording. I almost want to tell you to stop listening right now and watch the 22 minutes of David Foster Wallace talking about this experience through life and how he goes on to not explain, but introduce a new and really different way to think. It's not necessarily existential, but it is definitely profound. And it's a speech that I come back to, gosh, every 6, 8 months to just ground myself in remembering this is water, but also asking what the hell is water. So again, we begin to ask ourselves, what the hell is water? What is this thing that is constantly surrounding us, putting our thoughts and our feet in the shoes of the fish, understanding that this collective experience that we have around what is life and how we operate through life is really something that we don't necessarily take the time to even consider, especially in today's day and age where everything is so sped up and we're consistently and constantly distracted and working through different problems and challenges within ourselves and our relationships and our connections that we often forget what we truly are looking to do and get out of our experience. And David Foster Wallace, in this speech, he talks about how a degree that these students are getting isn't necessarily for the knowledge and um the facts and the things that they learn in their studies, but it's really the idea of how to think. That is what a good education will provide. How to think, not what to think, but how to think. And he dives deep into what that actually entails and how we can use this parable of fish in water to create a sense of awareness for our shared experience in life and what that actually means, because we're all going through this thing called life together, and we're all at, in some respect, the two fish, right? Because so often we're going through life without noticing the things around us. We're so enthralled in our day-to-day to-dos and in our responsibilities and stresses and anxieties and all of these emotions that are coming up but also being suppressed. All of these uh, actions and reactions that we feel are so important in in the moment, but when we zoom out, we realize it's not the case. And I think that really provides the framework and the lens that you want to look into what you're discussing when you are thinking about being a fish in water and how you flow through the ocean and through the motion of your days. Because, as he says, the most obvious and important realities are the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. And that flows and brings him into the part of the story where he talks about the what I and I think society would call like a main character syndrome. He basically says that every experience that we have in life and everything that we do is from our perspective, right? Like we are the main characters in our own lives. And that provides actually a lot of freedom in that sense because we can take uh the desires and the wants that we have to really take control of our actions, and we can be that protagonist in our story, right? There is something that is deeply human and profound about being the main character and about that. However, one thing that he stresses and that I want to really bring into a perspective that he talks about is what if you took yourself out of that default main character selfishness and started to see yourself as an observer, not necessarily an NPC, which NPC is a non-player character. So not necessarily is that where you're just going through the motions, but can you be an observer? Can you understand that the shared experience that we have throughout life and your experience in life is also playing not only a factor, but it's a vital piece of the other interactions and experiences that are around us. Now, I think that Wallace is talking about this main character syndrome from like the lens and from the idea that we want what's best for ourselves. We want starting with survival and success and things of that nature. But there's also a default setting that we tend towards that can create unnecessary stresses and unnecessary emotions that boggle down and end up creating a real toughness and unnecessary angst to life. So when thinking of like what is a real education and not what to think but how to think, it becomes, what are you paying attention to? Are you paying attention to the little inconveniences that come throughout your day? And we'll talk about the grocery store and the mundaneness of just what it means to be actually day by day and what that is when you start to experience this more unstructured adult life that doesn't have a set of rules and path that we're typically um, looking to follow from like a what is success and going through 12 or however many years of school where you're graduating with others and you're really in a single file line with your peers. But then once you separate and you begin this real education, what he calls the education after you graduate, then you start to notice people going on different paths and some people are, trying new things and going into unconventional routes. Some people are going up, some people are going down, some people seem like they're crushing it, and it just becomes a whole jumbled mess because you can't help but compare from the where you started of an aligned structure to now what feels like a chaos in not knowing what and where and who to think. So when you learn how to think and what to think about, it's becoming a challenge, but also a skill, a true skill of how do you devote your time and energy? And what are you going to devote your time and energy towards? Because it's not about winning arguments and being right. It's about finding fulfillment in a way that n- only really you can define. And like I said, he starts talking about this supermarket and the traffic jam. So one of the things that Foster Wallace discusses is this notion of the day to day, of how the students in the audience don't actually understand the day to day. And he goes into this long story of what it's like to go from your office job to picking up groceries in a crowded supermarket to driving home in traffic, and just something that maybe you've experienced it where you can't help but like start to press and you're like, why are people not acting the way that I would act in this situation because I'm doing it right? It's very me, right? I think another like story that would resonate with a lot of people, I'm sure, is like the airport. Like I know how to get through airport security the easiest, fastest way. I have my identification ready and my passport and my ticket ready, and I can get through the TSA line with no issues whatsoever. But that person who is holding up the line when I have a flight to catch and I got here with actually enough time, but now this person's screwing up my schedule, that creates a whole sense of just compounding and avalanching negative thoughts that ends up projecting out really what can become harmful way to view the world. And there's a word that I consistently come back to when listening to this, and it's a word called Sonder. Sonder. And Sonder is the idea that the person who is walking across the street or passing by has the same complex, equally unique experience that I do. And it's a really eye-opening concept. Because when you go through these super, what can be frustrating stories and moments throughout our day, if you take time to remember and acknowledge what others may or are going through in their lives, it becomes this chosen story. Where Foster Wallace talks about maybe the person who is disheveled hasn't slept in days because their husband or wife is sick in the hospital, or or the person who cut you off in traffic is actually in much more of a rush than you are because they need to get their child to the emergency room because they're having an allergic reaction. And coming back to the idea of this being water, it allows you to take a step out of your own main character tunnel vision view of the experience and open your eyes to being, again, not an NPC, but an observer into that side character of how can I actually help in this situation and make the situation a better or more understanding. Because one of the things that I believe is whether you want to talk about the positive or the negative of these two sides of the same coin, the default story often gets attributed to the negative, to the me, to the I know what I'm doing. This person shouldn't have done that because they should have seen me. But it's just as easy to attribute to the positive, and to understand and to connect and realize that there is a much bigger story out there than just the one that you're telling yourself. You can alter your thoughts and you can use practices to become more aware. And again, maybe the default is true. Maybe the person is cutting you off and maybe they are an a-hole and maybe that's the case. But do you really know that without having a conversation or without taking the time to understand their story? Because at the end of the day, what is the best way to go about these situations? Is it having a negative perception of everything going around and the world being out to get you and wanting to struggle and be constantly pushing and stressing towards a result that isn't even what you're striving for and not yielding what you need? Because coming back to fulfillment, is it going to be fulfilling when you achieve this desire that you claim to want? Are the stresses and the stories that you're putting yourself through allowing you to actually get there in a way that is justified with yourself and others? I mean, Foster Wallace talks about the how everybody's worshiping something, and we're in a society that people will worship money, they'll worship fame, beauty. And I just love the way that he lays these points out because he talks about how there's no such thing as an atheist. And I mean, 2005, like this was during the rise of really the new atheism. And we especially 21 years ago seeing the fall in religion throughout the country, but there is that fall, but now we're starting to see it rise. There Gen Z is having some of the highest like church going and religious kind of reawakening in a generation. And I think that is really important because going back to this idea of structure and this idea of being the main character, like one thing about religion is it is almost a rule book in how to go about a selfless and a connective way to live. So if we get to choose what we worship and we have all of these factors in here, then it can or should we decide to worship something else, something more profound, something more shared? I think it's a really interesting question, and it comes back to, okay, well, what is water? What is this thing that's surrounding us that allows us to uh, create strong bonds and to build and collaborate together and have positive outcomes? Because the water that we surround ourselves with, that we're constantly inhaling and exhaling, creates who we project out. It is that reflection. So when you have that choice, when you have that ability to alter your ideas and thoughts and how you're going about it, then it can really change your outlook on that conversation you had with the call center person who wasn't letting you make an adjustment to your trip because you didn't book the flexible ticket and you realized that you put in the time wrong, and there's got to be something that they can do to help you out, but they're just not doing it. So you really want to, to have them hook you up, but you have no reason to because you haven't put in the energy and the time to actually build a connection. And they're just doing what they're told. They don't want to deal with the extra headache and the extra paperwork. And you start to understand this game of like chess that you're playing for no reason with a faceless person over the phone that for all you know could be an AI. And it allows you to just take a step back and to ponder the Sonder of this person and of yourself and how this impacts how you can adjust for the future, how you can recorrect, come back to neutral, and remind yourself that this is water, right? You constantly are telling yourself this is water. Like that's the key takeaway here isn't necessarily some totally like unheard of um unlock, but it's a shift in perspective of how we go about our day that can allow you to find joy in really simple things, in the flowers on the side of the road, in the breeze touching on your skin, in the smile that a mother gives her baby in the stroller on the sidewalk. When you notice these things, you realize that the problems that you're attributing to yourself and the lack of vibration and color um, that you're projecting and exuberating throughout can be brighter. It can be more invigorating. And the opposite is also true. That means that the hard things might feel harder and the wins will feel high and the lows will feel low. But the key of reminding yourself that this is water is that you come back to neutral. So when you're in this state of life that is constantly up and down and comparing and contrasting and growing and shrinking and expanding and adjusting, you just want to be able to remind yourself this is water and I want to remain neutral. I want to be able to feel the highs and feel the lows, but not get stuck in that whiplash of back and forth, of introducing practices of awareness and meditation and reflection and uh, action that can provide a true and altering perspective. Because in the 20 or so minutes that Foster Wallace talks about this idea of choosing what to think about, he discusses heavy topics. He discusses suicide. He talks about the dangers of living inside your mind. And he says a really great quote of the mind is a great servant, but a horrible master. Because if we're constantly living in our heads and we're telling ourselves stories that don't have necessarily any real truth to them, then that can drive you crazy and those thoughts can be hell. So when practicing this idea of awareness and of taking yourself into the parable of the fish and reminding yourself that this is water, this is life, it can alleviate some of that tension and provide some clarity of what direction to go and how to go about it. And I think that that's the real takeaway here is it's not going to get easier. And the connections that we have are only going to get greater while the distance that we feel between each other are only going to get longer. Technology is coming at a rapid rate. AIs and automation and robots and all of these things are becoming ubiquitous with our everyday life. But that doesn't mean that the human connection of smiling and saying good morning to that person in line at the coffee shop has to go away. You can take your AirPods out and listen to the birds and the wind and the cars in passing. And you could start to experience what the water actually feels like. And that becomes a practice when in it of itself. You'll start to maybe notice how the way that you're showing up is changing. You're maybe not in as much of a rush. You can slow max, you can expand your breath and you could get out of your head. And when you get out of your head, that can allow you to find that softness and that acceptance of what truly is water. Because it doesn't have to be just the world being out to get you. It can be a beautiful experience of going through life, swimming with the flow, swimming against the flow, and just crafting a story that is worthy of being shared with others. But most importantly, the story that you want to tell yourself. So again, I can't recommend this podcast enough or this speech. It'll be linked in the show notes. This is a little bit of a different reflection that I've done previously, but I just really want to share these timeless practices and this perception and this perspective of this practice it has been super impactful for me. It's allowed me to change a lot of the ways that I go about what I now view as small inconveniences that allow me to get through my days. So, thank you as always for listening. If you have any recommendations on podcasts or speeches or any evergreen, timeless conversations that you consistently come back to, drop them in the comments. And I hope over the course of the next day or few days and beyond, you can remind yourself this is water. This is water. Because the send off that David Foster Wallace gives in this speech is that he wishes the students the best of luck because we all know that we're going to need it. Aho.